My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Rob Alstrin. It's August 14th, 2025. We're at Adelsheim in Newburgh. Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. First question to get things started. Why wine?
Why wine? That's a good question. I haven't prepared it all, so we're just going to go with it. So why wine? I think if I go back far enough, my father was in the food business, so he worked for various food companies and liked to cook, and we grew up most of my life in Arizona, so we do a lot of hunting and fishing and outdoorsy stuff. My mom, on the other hand, pretty much stayed at home and took care of the day-to-day cooking, and she was more the creative type, lots of arts and crafts, and so I think it's a combination of those two, really, you know, the creative side of my mom and on my dad's side, the food piece. So, and then obviously later in life, I finally discovered wine, and I was in technology, working for a semiconductor company, and I happened to be good at sales, so I won some sales competition. My boss took me out to lunch, and he's like, "We got to have this great wine." And I'm like, "I know nothing about wine." And I tried this wine. I was like, "Hey, that's pretty good. You know, I should check out wine." So that's how it started. After college, just tasting some wine, and then on it went from there. There's a long history of why I ended up in it, but the short summary is I worked in technology for a while. I moved to Sydney, Australia in 1990, and that's not far from the Hunter Valley in Australia, so I would take weekend trips and go up to the Hunter Valley and taste wine, and as I continued to do well in technology, I started collecting a little bit of wine. And then I was like, wow, this is great. I have a cellar now, and I'm really interested in wine, so I should learn more in my part-time when I'm not doing technology. So I studied at the University of Adelaide in Roseworthy remotely. So I did a remote 4-year course in wine marketing. And I would take my vacations from technology, fly down to Adelaide, and do sensory evaluation things for a week, and so it really took on this massive passion of mine to get into wine. And then I actually applied to get into winemaking school, enology, a university in Wagga Wagga, Australia, called Charles Stewart, and they said, "Oh, there's a 2-year waiting list," and so I put in my name, and then by the time they came around and said, "You're eligible to come in," I said, "No, I don't think I want to be a winemaker. I think I want to be in wine sales." So it was, you know, fast forward a few more years, I moved back to the States, and eventually decided to get out of technology and get in wine full time. So it's a winding, long path to get in here, but that's why wine, I think, from the start.
Amazing. All right, we got lots of questions. I'll come back about and fill that in. But tell me about kind of life before wine. Talk about growing up in Arizona and kind of path to college.
Yeah, I'm the middle of 3 boys, and played a lot of sports. And my dad traveled a lot for work in the food business. And my mom loved animals, so every time my dad left, it seemed like my mom would go find a new animal and bring it in. So we had turtles and dogs and cats and ferrets, and we had a raccoon for a while that lived in our house. My younger brother really wanted a monkey, so we ended up getting a cinnamon capuchin monkey that lived in our house. We had a horse. I took care of the horse. You know, so it was always entertaining. And my mom, of course, that's where she found her female energy, from female animals, because she had 3 boys, and she's about 5'0", and we were all taller than her. So it was good. Growing up in Arizona was nice. It was kind of 1971 we moved to Arizona. My dad worked for Armour Foods. I was born in Chicago, and so we moved when they moved their corporate headquarters from Chicago to Phoenix. So Armour Greyhound buses and Armour Foods, he was like a VP in there, and so we moved to Arizona, and I grew up in the desert and enjoyed the heat for the most part. But yeah, that was kind of life before college. Most of my life was Arizona growing up, and then my junior year of high school, we moved to California for a year, and then El Paso for my senior year, and then I went to college in Texas, and then moved back to Arizona after Australia. So I've been kind of all over the board. But
what was the kind of the prompt to get into just the first career? What prompted you to get into semiconductors?
I think it was just the pace of things in semiconductors. This is, I graduated '87 from college, so it was like the '80s, and it was like the booming time. Everybody's like computers, So I loved the new frontier, really, is what it was. And so I remember I interviewed for CompuServe, which was like, back in the day, an online thing, and I had a modem and it would dial up. And so I loved the technology and the curiosity on what we could do. So that was really fascinating and still is to me. I think this sense of curiosity and what we can do and how we could create easier ways of life and try and make things simpler, but in fact, it's probably made things more complicated. So, but yeah.
So take us through kind of the career path for you then. What was the first place you worked, and what was kind of the trajectory for you?
Yeah, so I got out of college, I interviewed with lots of companies, and I was in Texas. And so the first question in most of those interviews are like, will you leave Texas? Because most people in Texas won't leave Texas. So I was like, yes, please. I'm not from Texas, but I would like to get out of Texas. No offense to people in Texas. I have a lot of good friends there, and I like it, but I didn't want to live there forever. So I got a job with a company called Arrow Electronics. So it was a large semiconductor distributor, and they recruited all around the U.S., and then got about 40 of us or 50 of us, and we were sort of, I forget what they called it. It was sort of a cohort of new college graduates that they picked from all around the U.S., and they flew us to Virginia. They trained us on electronics and semiconductors. We were generally marketing people and salespeople. My minor was in industrial distribution. So we got the technical training, and then they redeployed us all across the U.S. And so I ended up going back to Arizona to work in the branch office there. And I started as an inside salesperson, so doing phone calls and talking to manufacturers like Motorola and Honeywell, and trying to get a chance to bid on the components that they needed to make the equipment they were making. So I did that for like a year, and then got promoted to field sales. So I got out on the road and covered Tucson and Phoenix. And at that point, I started moving more into hardware, bigger hardware, like printers and storage subsystems, RAID arrays, as they called them, that work mainly on Sun Microsystem platforms. So I did that, and then eventually got into more product management, where I could kind of be the expert on the content for our salespeople. Mm-hmm. And that was like 3 or 4 years into the job at Arrow, and it's a big Fortune 500 company, so I was like, I don't want to be in this sort of environment. Like, I don't like the politics and the big corporate world. So I talked to my girlfriend at the time, and I said, hey, I think I want to quit, and I have some friends that I met in Australia. I'd like to go to Australia, even for a year, and see what happens. So I quit my job. Well, obviously there's a long process to get your visa to go to Australia, so that took about a year. I applied for a permanent residency without ever going to Australia. So it was a long, complicated process. And so finally got that approved, and so I quit my job at Arrow. And in the process of saying goodbye to my clients that I had out in the field and technology world, one of them said, you should call my friend in Sydney. He has a technology company. He might hire you. So I did. He's like, I'll hire you. So I flew to Australia. He picked us up at the airport. He's like, here's a company car. here's a furnished place. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, life is good when you're in your 20s and you're like, okay. So I worked for him for 6 years when I was in Australia in Sydney. And we had offices all through Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, Bangalore, India. So I traveled all that area and loved it. And after 4 or 5 years, I got citizenship in Australia. So now I'm a dual US and Australian citizen. So yeah, it was a good time to take risks and kind of move around in the technology world, which was rapid at that point.
So you mentioned earlier the wine sort of coming up as a parallel here. Tell me about the wine education you got there and about sort of, from your own kind of personal perspective, developing your own wine education, developing your palate, starting to understand the world of wine.
Yeah, probably not dissimilar from most people. You start trying things, and I guess for me, a lot of that education was in Australia, so it's slightly different. It's very Australian, right? It's very not fancy. It's just like, I remember one of my first tastings at a winery in Australia was at Turkey Flat, and they're like teaching us how to spit. I'm like, that's brilliant. So I keep trying to do it here at Adelsheim, but we haven't done it yet. But it's like just learning how to spit so you don't feel foolish or you spill down your white shirt. So I started, really feeling comfortable in the wine world because it wasn't high society, fancy. It was kind of matter of fact. And so I started collecting wine, and a lot of the restaurants in Australia were BYO. So you'd go out to dinner with your friends and you'd take a bottle from your cellar, or you'd pick it up at the corner bottle shop, and you just enjoy it with dinner. And there, of course, you generally didn't tip at the time. So you're not pushed out of your table. You're sitting there enjoying some wine for a while, and you're not pushed to move on so they could turn another table. So I kind of love the relaxed social interactions of wine and the pairing with food. And so that just built by doing, more wine tastings, and then eventually applying at the University of Adelaide to do this remote course in wine marketing. And I didn't want to redo all the marketing basics, so I could test out of those. So really, this 4-year course I did in like 2 years because it was just the wine courses. And it was fascinating because I didn't know the production and the viticulture side of it. And I got to learn a lot about that and wear lab coats and taste flawed wines and, acidulated wines and all the rest of it. So, yeah.
So tell me about the program and about what you sort of got out of it. What were the main components of what you learned?
It's a lot of fundamentals. And then a lot of Australian specific things. So there was like wine law. That was one of our courses. And it was obviously particular to Australia and how you deal with the states of the different, areas of Australia and how you could ship and legally what you needed to do. But from a production standpoint, it was really fascinating. And we had several co-ops in Australia where there's fewer here, especially in Oregon. But learning how co-ops worked was really fascinating. And I loved the sensory aspect. So I loved kind of getting in the lab and tasting things and trying to explain them or understand why things tasted the way they did. That was probably the most exciting to me, was the sensory aspects, the tasting. We didn't do that much viticulture, and I think that's what I'm most enjoying currently, is really walking the vineyards and understanding these plants and how they're dealing with the climate and change and crop loads and all the rest of it. So yeah, there's a lot. I think ending up here at Adelsheim, it's kind of a core thing that I see in David Adelsheim, is this constant curiosity of learning. And he's 82 or 83 now, and he's still so curious about wine, and he's been doing it his whole life. And I've been doing it, I guess, a while now, 30 some years, and it is fascinating how there's so much more to learn. So yeah, I love the learning.
So what was the prompt for you to make the switch from technology to wine?
Yeah, I don't know what the prompt necessarily was. I remember the day I told my parents. I was in New York. I don't know why I was in New York, but I was in New York at this hotel in Lower East Side. I remember calling my parents and being like, "Hey, I think I want to get in the wine business." And my dad was like, "Don't confuse where you make your money with your hobby." And I was like, "What if I could make my money where my hobby is?" And he's like, "Yeah, but technology, you make good money." And I was like, "Yeah, but if you're not happy, it's not worth it." So eventually, I think I was living in Florida at the time when I made the decision. I was working for some friends out of Australia, and I ran a U.S. sort of distributor, importer of semiconductors. And I had done it for a few years back in the States. This is like 96 through 98. And I was like, I just don't want to do this anymore, technology, semiconductors. I'm just kind of over it. I've done it for a while. And wine was getting bigger and bigger to me. And so it finally was like, how do I get into wine? And what is it going to take? And so I think I took the summer off. I was living in Delray Beach, Florida, and went to the beach a lot, and then started interviewing with wine people. And my Australian wine importer friend in Florida is like, you got to call distributors and try and start there. So I called this distributor called Augustin Wine Imports in Florida, run by a husband and wife, Connie and Prohl. And I said, "Hey, I'm in technology, but I love wine. I studied wine in Australia. Can I do anything for you? What can I do?" And they're like, "Well, we can't pay you nearly what you're getting paid, but we can pay you this, and you can kind of run our inventory and help us automate things." So I kind of came in like as an operations person. Back then, this is like 98 or so, 1998, 99. We had a warehouse in Fort Lauderdale, and we would, through some accounting system, have an inventory sheet. And so our salespeople would have this massive book of papers and look up what the inventory was. And then they would like call in their orders to the office or fax them occasionally. And so I found a software that could run on laptops that could take the inventory, and I'd give the salespeople laptops. And so I got the owners of the company to buy laptops for all the sales reps. And these had to plug into a modem and dial in. So we'd be at a restaurant and we'd be like, "Hey, can we borrow your fax machine?" And we'd plug it into the computer and we'd send our orders in. And they could look up exactly what the inventory was and what the customer bought before. Because back in those days, you'd call in from a restaurant kitchen and you're like, "Hey, can you send mise en place this, and this?" And sometimes you'd miss the product because you were seeing so many accounts in a day. This helped eliminate some of those errors. So I kind of then went to our warehouse team, which at Augustin was some guys from, Latin America that didn't understand the nuances of German Rieslings. And so I kind of set up item codes that when the containers we imported a lot of wines, when the containers of wine came in, we could label them all correctly, and then they could pick them accurately. So I kind of automated a lot of the warehousing functions of this distributor. And that's where I met a lot of Oregon people. That's where I met David Adelsheim in the late 90s. And a lot of the other people. We represented Willa Kenzie and Domaine Serene and Ken Wright and et cetera, et cetera. So I still hadn't been to Oregon, but it was a great learning experience to kind of work for that distributor. And so it was a big leap from technology to that, and it was hard, and it didn't make much money, and I was in a warehouse. It wasn't the glamorous wine life, but it was a start. Mm-hmm. So that's all I needed.
At that point, what was you mentioned obviously wine being something that had kind of drawn you in. What did you find fascinating about wine, and what kind of wines did you find yourself drawn to?
Yeah, I mean, It's interesting. I think it kind of evolved. We had a sales manager at that company, Enrique Ibanez. He was from Panama, and he's an amazing guy, incredible palate. And we had a lot of imports. We did Kermit Lynch and Mark de Grazia, so we had a lot of old world wines. And I think I loved doing the blind tastings. Every month we would sit down and talk about wines after we tasted them blind and uncovered what they were. So trying to focus in on the sensory aspect and then try and work through what it could be was the really interesting part to me. And I wasn't very good at it, but the owner of the company, Pearl Perry and Enrique, were exceptionally good at it. And so we got to taste a lot of wines from around the world. And I guess in those days for me, what I loved was sort of in general, the higher acid whites. Like we did Zenambrecht, and I loved Olivier Ambrecht's wines from Alsace, and we did Ostertag as well. And so I love those wines. We did a lot of German Rieslings that I loved. And then I tasted, I remember the first bottle of Oregon wine that I tasted that was really great. It was from Chehalem. We did Harry Peterson Nedry's wines. And I tasted a Ridgecrest Pinot from probably like 97 or 8. And I was like, wow, this is great. So I fell in love with that Ridge. I didn't know what Ridgecrest was or where Ribbon Ridge was, but I was like, this is amazing. And Harry's a great person. So that was like a big light for me. And then eventually I came to IPNC, I think, in maybe 99. And then I came to the first Oregon Pinot Camp by the invitation of David Adelsheim. I was working for Augustine in Florida, and David said, hey, we're starting this thing called Oregon Pinot Camp. Do you want to come? I was like, sure. I came out here and I was like, I'm done. I'm moving here. And that was the end of it. I've been here ever since. So.
You know, that wasn't the goal of Pinot Camp, right?
No, I keep telling new Pinot Camp people, hey, be careful. This is dangerous. It can change your life. So it's happened a lot since then. But it's a great change.
So let's talk about the IPNC and Pinot Camp. Tell me about your initial trips to Oregon. What were your impressions of Oregon and of the wine scene here?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I love the temperature. You know, I came out in the summertime and I was like, this is great. It's a hell of a lot better than Florida in the summer. And I remember sleeping at Harry's house when I first came, and we had the window open. I had the window open, sleep, and I was like, this is magic. It's like so nice at night here. This diurnal shift of like daytime is warm and at nighttime it's cool. I'm like, this is amazing. And it's so green and hilly, and the people were so friendly, you know. Harry Peterson Nedry, David Alstrin, such good friends, and everybody works together. I was like, how is this possible? So I kind of did IPNC, and I was like, wow, this is very luxurious and fancy. Like, you get off a bus and there's like cold brews, and it was really nice. And then Pinot Camp was a little different, a little more technical. And the first Pinot Camp certainly was not what it is like today. It was much less organized, but nonetheless really educational. And a lot of tastings and a lot of technical knowledge that I loved. So I pretty much knew after Pinot Camp that I needed to come back and move out here. The difficulty was my son was born in '99, and so he was like a newborn, and I was like, okay, I guess we gotta figure out how to move, and so I flew out here and I interviewed with a bunch of people. Laurent Montelieu, when he was at Willikenzie, I interviewed with him, and Lynn Penner-Ash when she was over at Rexhill. And then Tony Reinders, when he was at Serene, he's like, hey, we need someone. We were in Carleton at the time. And so I ended up eventually, interviewing again with Ken and Grace in Minnesota, which was also intimidating because it was a blind tasting. at their house, and I guess I did okay because I got a job with them, and that's how I started. I moved out to Oregon right after Pinot Camp and had a job with Ken and Grace at Domaine Serene, and I lived in their sort of garage apartment at their house for the first 6 months or so till I found a place to live, and worked with Tony down in Carlton at Serene for a number of years. So it was a good start. Yeah.
What year did you start?
I think it was 2001. I think it was 2001 when I officially moved here and started with them. And so I had been to, I think Pinot Camp 2001 was the first one, if I'm not mistaken. And so I attended that. By the end of 2001, I was living here. So it was less than 6 months from Pinot Camp to when I was living here working for Serene. And then I got on the board of Pinot Camp before 2002 Pinot Camp happened. So it was insane. I was sitting on the board meeting with Diana Lett and Nancy Ponzi and all these people, and I'm like, I'm just some punk kid from Florida that knows nothing, and you guys are the founders of the industry. It was crazy. It still is crazy to me, but yeah, it was an amazing start, really. Crazy.
Tell me about the initial role at Domaine Serene and about starting to get to know the industry here.
So at Serene, it was like Ken really, Evan said, really ran production with Tony. So that was kind of one avenue of the business, and Grace really kind of ran the sales and marketing, and that was me. So locally, Tony handled production, I handled sales and marketing, and we kind of reported directly to Ken or Grace. And obviously it's a small company and family, so we all work together closely. Ken and Grace at the time were working a lot on their Upshur Smith business in Minnesota, and their kids were, you know, Serene was not in the business, but Mark was, and so it was great. It was a family business, and Tony and I were kind of the face of the industry here locally, which was wonderful, but sometimes it was kind of challenging too, because at the time, most people that were in the industry were here all the time. And so there was some difficulty for us to manage that. But, you know, I think in the end, it was a really wonderful experience for me. I enjoyed the family and the business and the opportunity to really think big, as they continue to have done. And I saw Grace just at the auction this year, and it was great to see her. I hadn't seen her in a while. But it was wonderful. I self-distributed wine, Domaine Serene in Oregon, so I delivered cases every week to accounts. I called on all the accounts in Portland. And then I handled distribution. So we were probably in 10 or 15 markets. And so I would manage those distributors, and then it was about, you know, during the time I was there, we were starting to build the new winery with Ernie Munch as the architect, and so I kind of was there through the transition from Carlton to the new winery, which was an exciting time and great to have the space and the luxury of, you know, incredible winemaking operations. And we grew a lot in terms of production and new vineyards, so it was wonderful. And it was hard to leave. I left in 2005, and again, kind of like I started with them, I was doing an end-of-year meeting in Minnesota at their house. I was staying at their house, and Ken and Grace and I were out to dinner, and I was like, I got some news. I want to eventually have my own business. And they were like, great, yeah, I understand, we did too. And I was like, well, I want to do it like sometime in the next 6 months. And they're like, what, you know? And I think Ken got pretty upset. This might have been after a bottle of wine or two. And Ken was pretty upset, and Grace was like, Ken, remember what, you know, we said we want our people to grow and expand and take opportunities. And so it was It was good. It was a rough dinner. It's hard to tell someone that's been so kind and generous and helped that I want to go do something else and try my own hand at business. And then you have to go stay in their house, at the end of that. But it was fine. We're still friends, and it was good. So they were wonderful. I had hoped to start my business, within like 2 or 3 months of giving notice. It ended up being a little longer because I was like, I'm not going to leave on a bad note. I'm going to stick around and make sure that they are covered. Mm-hmm. So I helped hire my replacements and made sure everything was smooth as long as that took. Mm-hmm. And then I started a company called Northwest Core Collection. That was basically a national broker for sales of Oregon and Washington wines. And I started that in 2005. So,
where did the idea come from?
It came from, honestly, it came from, I think, a concept that I had heard about from one of the wineries. I think it might have been Bethel Heights. So there's somebody starting a business like this. And I think, I forget his name, Stephen Carey started this concept a long time ago. So people had talked about Stephen Carey doing it, and it was before its time. And so I was like, I want to try this. And so I wrote a business plan, and I needed some money to start it because it's like you can't start it a brokerage where you don't get paid till wine sells. So I reached out to my friend at the time, and still, Eric Solomon from European Cellars. So he's a great importer of Spanish and French and Swiss wines. And so we represented him at the distributorship I was in Florida. So I was like, Eric, hey, can you give me like $5,000 loan and I'll start this business? And he's like, sure. I think it was $5,000. Yeah, probably something like that. And so I started it. And then after a year or something, I paid him back double. And I'm like, thank you. And he's like, what are we going to do now? Like, I love this 100% return of my money. And I'm like, well, I don't know. So it started, and my initial wineries were Bethel Heights, Penner Ash, because Lynn and Ron were kind of leaving Rex Hill and starting their brand. I talked to Bill and Deb over at A to Z because they were just starting that, and Sam and Cheryl. So I represented A to Z in the early days. I talked to Josh Bergstrom, and he had his whole family in his business at the time, so he was growing. I talked to Laurent at Selena, and so I represented Selena. I talked to Vicki and Casey McClellan up in Walla Walla, and so I did Seven Hills, and so it was a great portfolio of wines. And my concept was to try and build sort of a pyramid, right? So the base volume is A to Z Rex Hill. The mid-tier might be Bethel Heights and Selena, and then the small stuff might be Penner Ash and Bergstrom. And so I kind of took this portfolio of wines and said, I can help you grow your distribution. Like, where do you want to go? What markets do you want to be in? And so kind of taking not a portfolio approach that everything must go to one distributor in Ohio, for example. I'd be like, hey, if you want Bethel Heights and that's the best fit for Bethel Heights, let's go with you. And if you want A to Z and it's a bigger distributor, well, let's go there. And it's up to me to manage how we sell to those people appropriately. So I did that for like 10 years. It was a good business. And it really leveraged my sales distribution experience and built my relationships broader in terms of how to run a business. So yeah, it was good. It was hard though.
What are the biggest challenges?
Everyone wanted you to get distribution, which is the hard part. So it's kind of front loaded on work. You're going out, spending a lot of time and effort to pitch Oregon wines to distributors that you get no money until they're buying it and shipping it. So once they were buying it and shipping it, then the wineries could go, thank you, we're done. And I'm like, wait, I haven't even reaped the benefit of all the work I spent in the front end. So it was a little mistake in my business planning. In hindsight, I wish I could have had some sort of program like people do with the music industry, where you get sort of a deteriorating royalty on your efforts, but I wasn't that smart. So as wineries got up and grew and had distribution, they were doing really well. They're like, okay, we can take it from here. And I'd be like, okay, fine. And then I'd go find new wineries that were starting. So I had a regular flow, but distribution got full too at the time, and you have so many Oregon brands in the early 2000s, and they're like, we have enough, but luckily Oregon has continued to grow in its demand and presence, and so distribution's been obviously a challenge for a lot of people over the years, and it's gone through a lot of changes. It's a tough business. So yeah.
You mentioned kind of the turnover of people kind of growing out, and when you looked for a new brand, what were you looking for in terms of what made the most sense to represent?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was like people, right? It had to be the right people. It had the right realistic expectations. Because some people I felt like I was just a therapist for them, and some people I was like doing a lot of the work, and they're like, I don't want to pay for anything. And I'm like, well, I get that too, but that's not the way it works. I need someone that can pay their bills and understands the business and is open to, suggestions on how we can do better. So I worked with like Rudy at Montanore for a while, which was great. And he came in and he and Kristen really understood the business, and they were great to develop. And lots of smaller guys too, it was just kind of finding the right people. And Jeff, that's how I met Jeff Meter from Eminent Domain. He came along and he's like, hey, I got this little brand. I'm like, it's too small. I don't want to deal with it. And he's like, how about if you want to be a 50% owner of it? And I was like, that sounds good, but what does that mean? He's like, oh, it's just X amount of thousands of dollars. I'm like, well, really? And he's like, yeah. So I was like, okay. And so I did that. He and I were partners in Eminent Domain. And then he's like, okay, it's time to buy barrels, so you have to pay for half the barrels. I'm like, what? That's a lot of money. So then I realized it's a little tricky to be a winery owner. But we had a good situation. He kind of owned his vineyard, and he and I owned the brand together. And then I had a sales arm, so he would basically sell his grapes to the entity that he and I owned, and then I would sell the wine and charge the brand for the sales efforts. So it was kind of good, and it worked well. We got into 20 states with a small amount of wine, and we changed winemaking, and we changed the label, and I'll never forget, it was my birthday. I was out to lunch April 30th, and Wine Spectator did their weekly update, and we got 90, a lot of points in their score. And my phone was going off with the orders. So I'm like, we're just a little brand. And the orders were just flying in. And I was like, wow, this is great. But the scores back then were a little more powerful than they are now. And so Jeff and I are still good friends, but he wanted to obviously build a house and expand what he was doing. And so slowly he bought me out, as I couldn't afford that sort of world. And so we're good friends, but it was a good experience. What
an interesting setup. I love that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you had the business for about 10 years. What came next?
Yeah, after that, it was kind of challenging. So I must have been 2015-ish. I was kind of burnt out because running my own business for 10 years, and we had, at one point I had 10 or 12 employees or something. So it wasn't a lot, but it was enough that I had a line of credit with a bank for a lot of money, and I felt a lot of responsibility. And I had gone through a divorce a couple years prior to in that period because I was traveling nonstop. It's hard on a family. I had two young kids that are now 25 and 23. So after that, I was like, I need a break. And so I took about a year off, and I went to Europe and went to Burning Man and, all those things you do, or I do. And then, I was like, what am I going to do? Do I want to even stay in the wine business? I talked to David and Eugenia here. I'm like, what should I do? And they're like, oh, I don't know, So I really contemplated a lot of different options. In the end, I went to work for the guy that lended me $5,000 to start my business, Eric Solomon. So Eric's like, I got a position for you on the West Coast, cover the Western U.S. for our import book. And so I did that for about a year or two, and I was like, I can't do this. I love Eric, but he's a hard guy to work for. So it didn't end great, but it was okay, and we're friendly. But after the brief stint with European Cellars, I remember being at the Oregon Wine Symposium, chatting to some friends, and I didn't have a position yet. I wanted to get back into Oregon because being out of the Oregon wine business and doing imports for a couple of years kind of felt strange, living in Oregon but not being in the Oregon wine business. So I was at Symposium and I ran into a couple friends and like, you should talk to so-and-so at Distinguished Vineyards that owns Argyle. So I interviewed a bunch of places and ended up taking a job with Argyle to head up their sales and marketing. And I worked for Steve Myers, who was the head of Distinguished Vineyards. And Rollin Souls and I went to the same university in Texas. We went to A&M. So I had known Rollin, loved Rollin. So it was and I love sparkling wine, so it was perfect. So I went to work for Argyle, just a great organization, had the corporate background of, being ultimately owned by Kirin in Japan. And so Steve Myers is a brilliant guy, probably the best guy I've ever worked for. So smart, so personable. So I loved working for Argyle Sparkling Wine, and Nate was the winemaker at the time, and he's such a great guy from the Midwest like I was. Jeff Hall, incredible vineyard manager who worked here at Argyle before he went over there. Adelsheim, yeah, before he went over to Argyle. So just a ton of respect for them. In fact, yesterday I had beers with some of their sales team. But I loved it over there. It was great, and I wouldn't have ever imagined leaving because I'm, again, Australian and U.S., and the in-between company between Distinguished Vineyards and Kirin is Lion Nathan in Australia. So I was like, this is perfect. I'll retire someday and live in Australia and be in the wine business over there, back where it all started. But oddly enough, somehow I answered a call that I didn't have a caller ID on my phone, and it was a headhunter that was like, everybody tells me I need to talk to you about this job I have, and I'm like, I'm not interested in a job somewhere else. And they're like, well, can I just tell you who it is and what it's about? And I was like, sure. I answered the phone, so tell me. And they're like, oh, it's Adelsheim. I'm like, really? Like, I love David and I love Adelsheim, but I'm happy where I'm at. And they're like, it's for the president CEO role, and this is roughly what it pays. And I'm like, oh, maybe I should talk to you guys. so after about 4 months of interviewing, they offered me the job, and I was like, I didn't think I would ever get offered the job. I was like, this is a great experience. I love them. It's great. So I got the job offer, and then I'm like, shit, now what do I do? I love where I'm working, but this is a big opportunity. So I talked to my wife at the time, and a lot of back and forth, and ended up making the big leap to come over here, which I started in May of 2020. So that's even more crazy, right?
That's an interesting time to start any job.
Yeah. It was hard to tell Steve I was leaving, but he and I are great friends. He just sent me a text the other day. He was having a bottle of Adelsheim up in Denali, up in Alaska, and he's like, "Hey, I was just thinking of you," and I'm like, "That's great. I'm sure you're going to bill me back for that." But yeah.
So before we get to Adelsheim, tell me a little bit about the work at Argyle. What was sort of the focus of your job, and what did you enjoy most about it?
Yeah, it was a lot of marketing. I mean, they have a machine over there in terms of they're a great location. They're busy. They're established in sparkling wine. So for me, it was a little bit about brand architecture and trying to figure out when the majority of Oregon wineries are single vineyards, and they were not about single vineyards. They were about nut house and spirit house and these blends. Trying to figure out how to manage that and whether we offer single vineyards and those, or how do we get sales traction on all these areas. And their sales team sells their other brands as well out of Napa and New Zealand. And so how do we get better sales traction from their sales team for our little Argyle brand? And the balance between, everyone wanting the Brut Cuvée versus Pinot Noir and Chardonnay that are still. So it was great. I loved working with the sales team. I loved working with Steve on how to adjust our branding and positioning of our brand. It was very good, but it was also slightly odd because Steve was based in California and I was up here, and Steve reported to Australia and Japan, and so it was complex. But really good people, was the best part. They're just great people and great wines. So yeah, it was good to see a successful, profitable wine business. I learned a lot.
When you're a small part of a bigger operation like that is multinational, tell me about the complicating factors for you and how you make sure you get heard in a situation like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess being heard wasn't a difficult thing. It's still small. Even the CEO of Lion, Nathan, would come out and he would talk to us. And so we had good access to conversations. I think it just gets complicated from a accounting standpoint and finance standpoint. I know, Rollin started that business with like, hey, it's a great vintage. We're going to make all this of this because it's fantastic. No concept on how that correlates to demand and sales. And now it's like very dialed in. Like we know exactly how many people are coming, what the trend is on visitation, what the conversion rates are. So data driven. It was like, that played into my technology background. I'm like, you guys are so dialed in. Like they knew exactly what was happening. Production-wise, they would adjust based on what's happening on sales. And so it was a really great example of how to run any business that is customer relating, because we have to look at what the customers are wanting and how much they're buying and make it accordingly. This is far from just-in-time manufacturing like technology was. And technology was like, you could turn on a dime. Here, it's like, this stuff takes years and years to plant and produce and then become, especially in sparkling wine, a finished product. So you have to have the data and be patient. So yeah, it was good. The downside was more some of the HR platforms and data metrics, KPIs, and et cetera, when we're a small company. It's like it's a little bit overkill. But I get the parent company has lots and lots of businesses. And
so let's talk about the process of coming on board here. You mentioned a lengthy interview process and a job you didn't think you'd be offered. So tell me about the interview process for yourself, and when the job was offered, tell me about sort of the mindset for you and the decision making.
Yeah. So the interview process, it started, I can't remember exactly when, but probably at the end of 2019 with some interviews. And so Lynn and Jack Lowacker were the owners, full owners of Adelsheim since 2017. So they interviewed me with some board members of theirs that run their other business, a couple other people, Brian and Rena. So I did an interview, which went well. I was kind of brutally honest with them because I was like, I'm not going to get this job anyways. I'll just say it how it is. So they were like, can you tell us about this on the financials and how would you change things? I'm like, I can do everything, but I can't do this. And I was like, I can't do this. This is too hard what you're asking. And I was maybe being a little dramatic. It was like, how do you elevate Adelsheim as a brand that's been around for as long as it has? And I'm like, that's extremely hard. I don't know if I can do that. I can do a lot of this other stuff, but trying to take a brand that has such legacy and history to make it be a top shelf wine, that's going to be really hard. And I think they appreciated the honesty of that. And then, a month or so goes by, and unfortunately Jack passes away. He had been sick for a while, and so that kind of delayed the process, of course. And then I came back and interviewed again after Jack's passing, and I think maybe a couple more times after that, and it was pretty clear it was like a good fit, and I was starting to get my head around what the state of this business was, and I really built a good relationship with Lynn and the other advisors. Then they offered me the job, and I was like, can I do this? Is this really what it's supposed to be? Is Lynn really a great owner? She is. And so I took the job, came here in the start of COVID, and it was all remote. And I knew David Adelsheim, but he wasn't the owner anymore, and he was my friend that I had known for a long time. And he's like, I just work here. It's like, and I'm like, what do you mean you just work here? You started this. And so it was interesting, I didn't know Gina, the winemaker, or Kelly from the Vineyard side, or Rich from the sales side. So I kind of came in brand new to this winery that I sold in Florida years and years and years ago. And I knew David, and I knew back then, Michael Adelsheim was selling to us, and other people were sales reps for Adelsheim, but it had been a long time since then. So it was a lot of Zoom meetings and trying to get to know everybody through Zoom and understand their business here and pivot hard to tastings outside and socially distance. And our tasting room was closed for months at the time. So it was a really strange time to get started. And then we were starting to, get ready like this time of year for upcoming harvest. And then obviously fires came soon after that. So what a horrible way to start a new job at the top of the food chain. And then tell the owner that we're not going to make any red wine in 2020. It's like, that was awful. It was really hard. There's a lot of things that happen that are hard in life, and I tend to be an optimist, so I find the little silver lining in all this stuff. And what I remember of that time is how well we worked together. Between Gina, the winemaker, Kelly, the vineyard manager, and myself. We were constantly on the phone, texting, monitoring the health of the air, and could we get our people out in the field? Did we have enough masks? Did we deal with our growers fairly when we were trying to figure out, can we make wine, can we not make wine? We were buying fruit from many other growers. We were selling fruit to other wineries. It was crazy, but we worked really well together. And when I told Lynn that, it's my recommendation that we don't make red wine, she's like, I trust you guys. You do what you think is right, the brand is too important, it's been around too long, and it's going to be around a long time. We can't risk it just for the sake of trying to make some money on this vintage. So I respected that, and I mean, she's been truly tremendous as an owner and an advisor to what we do here. So yeah, I try to forget that first year.
That's excellent, amazing timing. Wow. Tell me about outside of sort of the trauma of that year. Tell me about coming in as a leader in a time where everyone is remote and trying to kind of get to know people and sort of figure out a work environment and how things are going to work. How did you approach that? And as things started to get in person again, how did things adjust?
Yeah. I mean, lots of meetings. There was pretty good structure already. We had weekly all company or executive team meetings, and then monthly all company meetings. So I did a lot of one-on-ones with everybody through Zoom, taste room people, vineyard people, everybody. I wanted to get to know people and understand their story, what they were concerned about. So it was really a people thing, how they felt, what was happening. So it was lots and lots of meetings. And my wife is a couples therapist, so she was doing lots of those too. So we're both on Zooms in different parts of the house, and kids and dogs and cats and etc. around. It was crazy, but as we've learned, you can't get everything through Zoom. You miss a lot of the body language and the intelligence that you pick up outside of Zoom. So as soon as we could, we got back into person, and then it really helped a lot, especially as we were kind of, I forget what the term was, but we were able to be out and about in the world because we were farming, and so we had to walk vineyards. And so the first bit of my work here was to walk all the vineyards with the vineyard manager and the winemaker and talk about the thinning decisions, like what are we going to drop in green crop and why, and is this an upper tier block or is this a Willamette Valley tier block? And nobody had done that at this winery before. I mean, maybe David did way back in the day, but they were like, wow, you're actually walking the vineyards with us to figure out what we're going to do? And I'm like, yeah, it makes financial impacts to what we do and qualitative impacts. So that was, the summer of the start of it. And I think they realized at that point that I'm somebody who likes to get in and do the work. And I think that gained a lot of respect from them and the vineyard crew. And then I think from that first year on, I've also started where everybody in the company signs up on a spreadsheet when they can to help with harvest. So everybody's out in the vineyard in the mornings at the picks, and we're doing quality control, pulling out leaves and other things. And I mean, the vineyard guys and women that we have been with us 20, 30 years. And so when we're out there with them in the early mornings, stretching and getting ready, they get it. And I think it helped pull us back together as one company instead of being on Zoom and being not together. And it's nice. I mean, a couple of years ago, David Adelsheim was like, that was one of the best things you ever did, was get everyone involved in harvest and out of their cubicles or office and out here to be in the vineyard and understand the fruit and what it takes to get this done. So we continue that. We're doing a tasting next week with our farm labor contractors. So the people we bring in to prune or pick, they're not our employees, and we're going to do a tasting with them to show them tests and experiments we did on cover crop or crop yields or whatever, whole cluster, just so these guys and women can understand the impact of what they're doing, because they're the people that work every day out in the field and understand these plants. I mean, we're tending to over 250,000 plants on our estate. That's a lot of plants. I have a few at my house, not that many, obviously, but it's a lot of work.
So as you sort of started to assess your new job, what did you feel like were the most important things that you needed to do in the first, say, year or two? And what were the most important things that the company needed from you in the first year or two? If those are different things.
Yeah, I think the company needed consistency. The previous CEO came in and he had great ideas, big ideas, and really took some bold steps to change direction. So when I came on board, my first things were getting to know the people and understanding what they needed. And immediately Gina and Kelly were like, we just need someone to stay focused and stay on track. And I'm like, I got it. It was a lot of learning without making changes. And then because my background was so much in the sales and distribution end of things, it was easy for me to make those changes first. So we adjusted some wholesalers, we adjusted some of our internal staff, made some tough decisions to let some people go because it was COVID and we couldn't have duplication of skills and talents. So made some changes, and I think my vision was different from the previous CEOs, and that was hard for some people that were hired by the previous CEO. So I tried to get those people to come around. Some did, some didn't, and that's fine. But it makes for, some tough conversations and rocky periods, especially when you throw COVID in there and what was happening. And so it was a challenging time, a lot of people movements. My focus was really on trying to be able to reopen a tasting room in a safe way and do some direct sales, as well as try and understand more of our production and qualitative steps on how Gina became the winemaker in 2018. So she was relatively new as the head winemaker, but she had been with us for years. So my understanding was trying to understand what Gina was going to do different from Dave Page in terms of winemaking, and what did that translate from the vineyard side. But I quickly knew too that I didn't want to buy fruit from some growers and sell some of our fruit to other wineries. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I wanted to eventually get back to an estate model where we farm all of our own fruit. We have full control over our fruit. We haven't used herbicides in a long time, and we wanted to stay that way from a sustainability standpoint. So 2024, last year, was the first year in the history of Adelsheim we were estate. In 50 plus years, never been estate. So it was a big achievement. It happened to be a great vintage too. We had lovely weather, so that made it extra special. But yeah, it's been, this business, it takes a long time to make changes, and you can't do it hard and fast. So we're kind of continuing to move into that slight elevation of the brand, by being estate and bringing in more livestock, by really elevating our experiences here at the tasting room and our club offerings, by trying to work on wholesale and export a lot more seriously. Previously, we kind of had importers in Japan and other markets that were kind of lifestyle people, and now we've got real businesses that are operating in 20 countries representing our wines. Obviously, we're in a little bumpy stage right now, given the world politics, but it is a global wine business, and the Willamette Valley has become globally important. It wasn't when I moved here. And in the early years when I worked at Serene, I was on the Oregon Wine Board. I handled the exports I was the liaison for Japan. So I did 3 years of liaison, bringing Oregon wineries to Japan and China. It was a side trip for us. So to me, I always believed in the exports, just like Ken and Grace believed in not just selling in Oregon, they wanted to sell in New York City at the best restaurants and Miami and et cetera. So my view has kind of been similar. Like, I love our local community and it's vitally important, but we also need to have wine in Australia, where I want to live sometime, and have some of our wines there, because these are world-class wines and they deserve to be in the world, not just in our backyard.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned kind of a bumpy stage right now for everyone, obviously not just here. Tell me about sort of how you're navigating where we are now, and as you look ahead, what are the kind of the next steps for Adelsheim?
Yeah, how we're navigating right now is just, as we always have, community and collaboration. So for us, David and I and Gina and Kelly went to Burgundy 2 years ago or so, and talking to a lot of the Burgundian producers about what's happening in the world and climate change and trade in general. We share a lot of that information. And with the fires of 2020, same thing. We're calling people in Australia. So right now, we're all trying to figure out wine consumption and, all the issues that we're facing. And, we're, as a small business at Adelsheim, we're doing our best to remain fiscally tight and sharp, and thinking bold on how we continue to carve a path to be around for another 50 to 100 to hundreds of years. That's our goal, my goal. I'm only here for a little while. This brand hopefully will be here much, much longer. And I got to make sure that we're doing little things right so that we remain there. And it's going to be tough for a while longer. But I have no doubt that we'll get through it. It's just not as fun as it is sometimes. We're making some of the best wines ever. David is the happiest I've ever seen him. He loves the wines we're making now, and he's ecstatic. And to me, that's a great sign. And so I think for the future of us is continuing to focus on exceptional wine quality, which is that thing I said is so hard to do, raise the elevation of this brand. So that's a key principle, is the wine quality. And Gina and our vineyard manager, Ariel, and I spend a lot of time figuring that out. The sustainability piece is key. We're working on finalizing our B Corp, and we're working with many other organizations to look at how we continue to manage climate change and deal with that. Our people, our staff, from when I started in COVID, was a key piece, and so it still is. So how do we educate and develop our people and do a better job for our people to really enjoy the work here? The guest experience has changed a lot, and so how do we continue to tweak it when people don't have as much disposable income? So looking at what do people want and how do we provide the right tasting at the right price? So there's lots of things that we're working on to try and remind people that live in Portland even that this little short trip out here is like a mini vacation that you can come and relax. Like I said earlier, yesterday I had a beer and the people from Argyle weren't there yet, and I was sitting out, it was like 4:30, having a beer at Red Hills, and I'm like, this is like my mini vacation. I get like a half an hour with no one to talk to and just look at the sky and hear the music. I'm like, this is great. People need to come do this. So don't forget that this wine industry is not far from you, and it's welcoming. So we've got some plans on how to tap into younger consumers. We've got plans on how to be more hospitable and open to everyone. So, yeah.
What about for the industry in general as you look ahead?
Yeah, I think, the industry's filled with wineries, and it's been booming here. It's going to take people that are really serious about sticking around and being around. I mean, we make wine with CJ McCollum as a NBA basketball player, and we're doing a dinner tomorrow night with him. And I talked to him like, are you serious about this? Because this is hard work. And he's like, I'm not afraid of hard work. And I'm like, yeah, true. You know, so it's going to separate some people that really have it as a lifestyle or really want to do it, because it's tough. I talked to David a lot about, like, did he envision this was where we'd be 50 years ago? And he's like, no, I couldn't imagine this. And I see that trajectory growing. I mean, this is going to be a place that people are going to want to come to forever. So I see great blue skies ahead. It's just right now it's a little gray and cloudy.
Perfect day for your metaphor.
Right.
Last question for you then. Tell me about, to this point, what's your proudest accomplishment or greatest achievement? What makes you proudest as you look back?
Whew. Yeah, I'm not one to really do that very often. I like to look at what I got to fix and what I got to work on. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll know that when I get there. I'd say to date, it's really being able to shift from my passion to my business. You know, I've been able to convert out of technology into this and be successful in this. I'm at a place I love being, and I walk back and forth through the vineyards, and I call a lot of my competitors my friends, you know? So it's pretty fantastic to be able to do that. So I'm pretty happy with that accomplishment, as personal as it is. Yeah.
All right. All the questions we have for you. Anything we didn't ask that we should have? Anything we didn't cover that you wanted to cover today?
I mean, we could do this for hours more. I thank you for allowing it, because it's something, you know, like I said, I don't really do, because there's work to be done. But this is nice, a nice break, and I'm glad to be able to look back on some of these archives of people that I've loved and worked with, you know, over the years that have moved on. So it's great. I appreciate you guys doing this.
Thank you for taking the time and reflecting back with us, and thank you for sharing this day with us. Enjoy this cooler day in the valley and your big tasting you have coming up here in a minute.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We'll let you off the hook.
Thank you.